In July, the world lost an incredibly talented comedian and actor, Paul Reubens. He has provided us with many laughs over the years, and probably his most enduring legacy is his character, Pee-Wee Herman. There was a time when, largely from his own design, people knew him a lot more as Pee-Wee than as Paul Reubens. This is the kind of character that could have easily been irritating, but thanks to Reubens, he immediately shot up to becoming a beloved comic icon. He started developing Pee-Wee in the 70s when he was a member of the Groundlings, working alongside his friend, Phil Hartman. The initial conception of the character was as a failed stand-up comic, with him making his first screen appearance on The Dating Game. This version of Pee-Wee later appeared in Cheech and Chong's Big Movie, very different from the character people would later become familiar with. Reubens plays a rude and antagonistic hotel desk clerk who gets into arguments with Cheech and Chong, and then later appears on stage introduced as Pee-Wee Herman. Reubens auditioned for Saturday Night Live, but did not make the cut. After that, he decided to retool the character again for a stage show where Pee-Wee is depicted as a child hosting a 50s-style kid show. Despite the colorful sets and fantastical elements like a genie living in a box, it was primarily aimed at adults and had its fair share of dirty jokes, but you see the seeds being planted here. Titled The Pee-Wee Herman Show, it was a big success. It was even recorded and aired on HBO, helping him gain an even larger audience. Through the hour-long show, Reubens comes up with all kinds of inspired jokes as Pee-Wee excitedly interacts with the various characters who step through the door. Hartman even played one of them, Captain Carl. What's great is Reubens does not hog the spotlight. He allowed his co-stars to have their moments to shine too. The show perfectly highlighted Reubens' comedic skills, and there's so many hilarious moments. However, it's not just a series of sketches. Pee-Wee does experience an arc, and Reubens successfully captures the excited, hyperactive mind of a child throughout the show. He was then invited to make several appearances on The David Letterman Show, which would further broaden his reach. With Pee-Wee's growing popularity, Reubens was offered by Warner Brothers the chance to make a movie. Noticing employees on the studio lot riding around on bicycles, he came up with a story where Pee-Wee gets his beloved red bike stolen and teamed up with Hartman and Michael Varhol on the screenplay. While he was searching for an appropriate director, Shelley Duvall recommended Tim Burton after working with him on the short Frankenweenie. It did not take long into a screening of Frankenweenie for Reubens to decide he was the perfect choice, and thus he got the chance to direct his first feature film. Pee-Wee's Big Adventure is a delightful comedy that greatly mixes Paul Reubens and Tim Burton's sensibilities. The movie has so much fun with taking Pee-Wee on the road, taking advantage of him being out of the theater. There's some very funny moments with him at the Alamo trying to get a ride, and then in Hollywood. Throughout his journey, he meets all sorts of characters with their own fun personalities, and I like that he becomes friends with many of them, even helping them with their problems. There are dream sequences, which is where we see most of Burton's visual style come through. And then there's Pee-Wee's house, which has plenty of fun visual gags, including the iconic breakfast machine. It was with this movie that Reubens also brought more of an innocence to Pee-Wee and made something more family-friendly, but without losing too much of what made him so appealing. In the end, the movie showed the endless possibilities of this character and is a nice breezy 90 minutes. Pee-Wee's Big Adventure also proved he could sustain a longer story, and its box office success led to more opportunities. Reubens even finally got to appear on Saturday Night Live, hosting an episode as Pee-Wee. He would also show up in the comedy movie Back to the Beach, where he performs a cover of Surfing Bird. Pee-Wee was becoming a celebrity in his own right, to the point he was a focal point of that film's marketing. He even filmed an anti-drug PSA, probably the only time Pee-Wee is portrayed as completely serious.
This is crack. Rock cocaine. It isn't glamorous, or cool, or kid stuff.
The 80s sure were a wild time. Following Pee-Wee's Big Adventure, CBS wanted to produce an animated series, a typical proposal whenever a movie with children's appeal became a hit. Reubens turned that down, though, and instead pitched a live-action series with elements from the stage show, albeit geared towards a younger viewership. Working with other writers, designers, and bringing on board some of his Groundling friends, Pee-Wee's Playhouse began airing on CBS in 1986 and was a big ratings hit, becoming popular with both children and adults. I admit this was never a show I watched when I was younger. It just never crossed my path, while that could also be attributed to a certain controversy, which I'll get to. Watching some episodes of the show, I completely understand why Pee-Wee's Playhouse was such a big deal in the 80s, as it is a highly creative and funny show. It has fun with the format of a children's variety show and spins on its head, with the lessons taught, the wacky characters who inhabit Puppet Land, and the various vignettes shown. One of those presented a clip from a public domain cartoon, something also done on the stage show, and another had stop-motion animation, originally provided by Aardman Animation. Wallace and Gromit creator Nick Park had a hand in those, with Hey Arnold creator Craig Bartlett later working on them. The show has a zippy energy to it, but not unbearably so, and it was often a surprise what wackiness Pee-Wee would get into, including what the secret word would be. During the production of Pee-Wee's Playhouse, Reubens signed a deal with Paramount Pictures to make multiple Pee-Wee movies for them. The first of these ended up being Big Top Pee-wee, which has him encountering a circus that has blown into town. The concept of Pee-wee being part of a circus is not a new thing, as a deleted dream sequence in Big Adventure depicts him on a tightrope. Tim Burton did not return to direct, so Reubens brought in as Flight the Navigator director Randall Kleiser. Curiously, the film largely ignores Big Adventure and is instead its own standalone sequel. It's generally considered a big step down from the previous movie, and while I agree it's not nearly as good, it has its moments. I like the idea of Pee-wee being a farmer, and there are some chuckles here and there. There's also a message about tolerance, which is still very much relevant. The film is just missing that extra spark, but the strangest thing of all is giving him a love triangle. The premise involves him trying to cheat on his fiancée, which feels at odds with the childlike nature of the character. Reubens said they thought it would be hilarious if Pee-wee was made sexually active, which, fair enough, but I found those aspects to be the weakest parts of Big Top Pee-wee. Despite the popularity of Pee-wee's Playhouse at the time, the movie was a box office flop, and Paramount immediately canceled their contract with Reubens, which is a shame, because Pee-wee could have been one of those characters like the Little Tramp, Monsieur Hulot, and the Muppets, where he could have various adventures in different sorts of situations. Shortly after this, Paul Reubens wanted to try new things. He decided to end the show, and Pee-wee's Playhouse aired its final episode in November 1990. Several months later, Reubens was arrested at a pornographic movie theater, which shocked many people and led to CBS pulling the planned Pee-wee's Playhouse reruns. It was a ridiculous scandal that primarily became a big thing because of his association with that character. However, what was nice is many people stuck up for Reubens, with the majority of those publicly polled disagreeing with the network's decision. Although Reubens himself seemed to find the humor in his situation, even appearing as Pee-wee at the MTV Video Music Awards a few months later to massive applause and making this joke.
Heard any good jokes lately? What was that one? Oh, so funny I forgot to laugh.
And when he signed on to play one of the villains in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, he asked if he could base his character's look on his own mugshot. Pee-Wee Herman would take a long hiatus, though, with Reubens taking on other roles. However, part of him considered bringing him back on multiple occasions. He even wrote a few new movie scripts that he hoped to make. One was a more adult comedy inspired by Valley of the Dolls. The other was family-friendly and involved the characters from Pee-wee's Playhouse stepping outside the house. He even tried reuniting with Tim Burton for one of these, but they never got off the ground. Pee-wee would eventually return to the stage in 2010 of a new production of the Pee-Wee Herman Show. It premiered in Los Angeles and eventually made its way to Broadway. The show was acclaimed and a big hit, showing the admiration many still had for the character after all these years. Pee-wee would also show up on Saturday Night Live and Top Chef, as well as various talk shows and a sketch on Funny or Die. He also started developing yet another movie, this time with Judd Apatow producing and Reubens writing the script with Paul Rust. Universal was originally going to release it, but the project then moved to Netflix. Titled Pee-wee's Big Holiday and directed by John Lee, it centered on Pee-wee becoming friends of actor Joe Manganiello and going on a road trip to visit him in New York. I thought the film had its funny moments, and the friendship between Pee-wee and Manganiello was sweet. I do have two minor sticking points. One is that the movie felt like a retread of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. We've already seen the character go on a road trip where he stops at various locations and hijinks ensue. A few of those spots were funny, like a stop in an Amish community, but not enough to avoid those comparisons. You can also tell Reubens has aged since Pee-wee's last movie. Not his fault, but it's difficult to ignore that this childlike character was being played by someone in his 60s. With that said, Reubens was still delightful in the role, and had not lost his energy one bit. Despite my occasional issues with Pee-wee's Big Holiday, it was nice to see him having fun as Pee-wee again. Sadly, on July 30th, Paul Reubens passed away. This news was absolutely shocking. He brought people so much joy with not just Pee-wee, but several of the roles he played. He took this childlike character and helped make him such an icon, developing a fully rounded and memorable personality, while also working well alongside his collaborators to further flesh him out. Whether riding his bicycle through the Warner Brothers studio lot, chatting it up with his talking furniture, or asking, "I know you are, but what am I?" Pee-wee Herman has absolutely earned his place as an unforgettable comedic character, and while Paul Reubens is sadly no longer with us, him and his unique vision will always be remembered. See you next time.